when you label somebody a lefty, a righty, a canceller, uh, agnostic, maybe just not caring, et cetera, et cetera. It's too easy. It becomes just too easy to shut them down, and that's where I think Lukianoff and others. Notice if you read his actual book, this is more to the viewers. You've obviously read it a couple of times, but you see that he's even making the case that he has defended the kind of speech that he doesn't
Yep.
necessarily agree with. He
Yep.
doesn't agree with the opinion. And
Hmm.
nor does he say free speech is yelling fire in a crowded theater. He's not saying that either. He's simply saying there are certain comments that need to be respected. There are certain offhand jokes which land wrong, but that doesn't mean you eliminate or end someone's 30-year career because of one bad joke. And we've seen a lot of that. Um, I'm certainly not a national figure, but at the local level, I've received messages when I say I analyze a political situation the way that I did on, for example, on just after the 2020 election, where I said, ultimately, what happened tonight. This was on January 6th. We still had COVID restrictions, so I was analyzing from my backyard with a TV camera. And yes, if people follow me on Instagram, I really do the interviews with a shirt, a jacket, a tie, and gym shorts because you never see below my waist. But I was back there and I said, look, regardless what happened today in the Capitol, which will get sorted out, they're going to come back. They're going to certify the election. You're going to have Biden come in on January 20th. And the amount of messages that I received on my private accounts saying that that just wasn't true, that I was a liar, that I was this, that, you know, that was an opportunity for me to say, okay, that is still their speech. They are still able to say that.
Yeah.
So I didn't attack in response. I didn't respond to many of the messages, but it was basically, this is the US system of government and it will proceed as such. And yes, at 4 a.m., they came back, they certified the election, it was over. But those are the types of issues that I have had where but some of the folks in our newsroom, they are wrong. Yeah, they're wrong, but I'm not going to tell them, don't tell me that. You're
Yeah.
allowed to have that perspective.
Yeah.
You're allowed to think that. And we're getting to a point, I think, in other parts of the country, and I have the book here. Certainly throughout the book, he gives examples where they disagreed with something that was said or how it was said, or there was one individual out of hundreds or even thousands who were offended, and these groups just go to cancel the individual, go to eliminate them.
Yeah.
That, in my view, is just wrong, and it's not something that should be tolerated. It should be pushed back against. I really do think Lukianoff is doing good work because you don't have to agree with your neighbor, your coworker, but you have to tolerate that they have a perspective. And we're seeing that's not the case even when you look at network news and the way that folks consume their cable news. It is we're not broadcasting anymore. The term is narrowcasting. You're
Yeah, yeah.
finding your
Makes
group,
sense. That makes sense. Okay, so
and that's a concern.
let's build a background for Lukianoff. All right, he came onto my radar screen in 2018 when he co-authored the book "The Coddling of the American Mind" with Jonathan Haidt. And Jonathan Haidt has 3 books that are worthy of reading. The first is called "The Happiness Hypothesis," where he outlines something called the difference between the rider and the elephant, about kind of his version of how the mind works as a moral psychologist, right? So but he really got my attention with The Righteous Mind. So The Righteous Mind is all about why people are politically divided on religion and politics. Why are we so left and right and those type of things? Brilliant book. In my estimation, though, it's missing one thing. It's missing the work of Isaiah Berlin. When we cover that book, we'll get into the weeds on it. In the meantime, though, Lukianoff ran into him, I think, in the Village in Manhattan, and they kind of knew of each other. And Lukianoff approached him and said, "Look, I'm noticing something going on with college students." And him, Haidt being a professor at the time, noticed it too. That right around 2014, the battle for free speech switched sides. The students used to be 100% behind free speech. They wanted it in kind of classic anti-Vietnam protests from the 60s, all that type of stuff, right? So, well, what happens is Lukianoff approaches him and says, social media is doing something. And now the students are demanding speech codes because they're perceiving words as violence. So they're demanding trigger warnings, to demanding that professors not be allowed to bring up anything that could potentially offend them, and then starting to try to get them fired for doing so. And like I just went through his stuff again this morning before we did the podcast, and he talked about, because I was curious about why FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression that Lukianoff runs, why did they only cover 256 universities on their kind of watchdog list for the worst of the universities against free speech? Harvard being number one, which is kind of shocking to me. Virtually all of the Ivy Leagues are in the bottom 10%. It's almost proportional to how elite the university is. That's how bad everything is. But I was curious why I only covered 256 and not all of them, because if you were to Google it right now, you're looking at probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,000 colleges. So it turns out, he clarified it in a recent interview, 80% of all students go to 600 colleges. And it's like some crazy number like that. So it's kind of a factoring effect. And what happens is that what we got to do is keep an eye on them, because the number of professors being sanctioned or punished for what would have been covered under academic freedom in the past, we're in the thousands. In fact, there's something like 1/6 of all professors have been sanctioned in some way, shape, or form. 200 have been outright fired or tenured. 2/3 of them have been somehow punished in some way, shape, or form. And that's not about learning. That's actually the opposite. To me, when a student demands that a professor not be allowed to bring up anything that could potentially offend them, that's a special type of stupid right there. That is
Well,
anti-learning.
it is. And by the way, I just want to point out, you could find it on page 321 of Canceling the American Mind, number 28 in universities. That's slightly above average in terms of speech is Florida International University, my alma mater, where I earned my
Shameless,
2 degrees.
shameless
Um,
self-promotion.
Thank.
Congratulations.
I'm also an adjunct professor there, in the school for politics. But the challenge that I see here is